This first story comes from a guy named Marcus who worked as a security guard at an abandoned shopping mall in Ohio back in 2019. The mall had been closed for 3 years, but the property management company still required someone to patrol it at night to prevent squatters and vandalism. Marcus needed the money. He was in college and the overnight shift paid well. Plus, how hard could it be? Just walk around an empty building for 8 hours. He should have known better. Marcus's shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. The first week was uneventful. He'd walk the long, dark corridors with just his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating abandoned storefronts with broken glass and faded going out of business signs. The mall was massive. 3 floors, over 200 stores. It took him nearly 2 hours to complete a full patrol. Most nights he'd do 2 full rounds, then spend the rest of his shift in the security office, watching the grainy surveillance feeds. But on his 8th night, something changed. It was around 2 a.m. Marcus was on the 2nd floor, near what used to be a food court. His flashlight flickered for a moment, and in that brief instant of darkness, he heard it. Footsteps. Not his own. These were coming from somewhere ahead of him, echoing through the empty corridor. Marcus froze. He called out, "Hello? Security? If someone's in here, you need to leave now!" The footsteps stopped. He waited, listening. Nothing. Just the sound of his own breathing and the distant hum of the building's electrical systems. He continued his patrol, but now he was on edge. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound made him jump. When he reached the 3rd floor, he heard them again. Footsteps, but this time they were behind him. He spun around, his flashlight beam sweeping across the empty hallway. Nothing. No one. "This is ridiculous," he told himself. "It's just an old building. Old buildings make noise." But then he heard something that made his blood run cold. A child's laughter. High-pitched, echoing, coming from somewhere in the darkness ahead of him. Marcus radioed the property management company's emergency line. The dispatcher told him to investigate, but not to engage with anyone. If he found intruders, he should call the police. He crept forward, his hand shaking as he held the flashlight. The laughter had stopped, but now he could hear something else. Music. Faint, tinny music, like from an old carousel or music box. He followed the sound to what used to be a children's play area. There, in the center of the space, was an old coin-operated kiddie ride. One of those little cars that rocks back and forth when you put a quarter in. And it was moving, rocking back and forth, playing its little tune, even though no one was sitting in it. Marcus's rational mind tried to explain it. Maybe it was malfunctioning. Maybe there was still power running to it somehow. But then he noticed something that made him want to run. The ride was facing away from him, and sitting in the driver's seat, so small he could barely see over the back of the car, was a child. A little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, wearing what looked like pajamas. "Hey!" Marcus called out, his voice shaking. "Hey, kid, what are you doing here? Where are your parents?" The ride kept rocking. The music kept playing, but the child didn't respond. Marcus took a step closer. "Kid, you need to answer me. You can't be here. It's not safe." The ride stopped. The music stopped. And slowly, very slowly, the child's head began to turn. Marcus never got to see the face because at that moment, every light in the mall suddenly turned on, all at once.
hundreds of fluorescent lights flickering to life, flooding the building with harsh white light, and the child was gone. Marcus searched the entire play area. There was nowhere to hide, no doors, no exits except the one he'd come through. The child had simply vanished. He finished his shift in the security office, watching the monitors, too scared to patrol again. On the grainy feeds, he kept seeing movement in his peripheral vision, but whenever he'd look directly at a screen, there was nothing there. At 7 a.m., Marcus met with the day shift guard and told him what happened. The older guard just nodded slowly. "You saw the kid," he said. "You know about this?" Marcus asked. "Everyone who works night shift sees him eventually. The mall was built on the site of an old apartment building. Back in 1987, there was a fire. A family died, including their 5-year-old son. His name was Tommy." Marcus quit the next day. He never went back to that mall. But here's the thing that still bothers him. A week after he quit, he was looking through his phone and found a photo he didn't remember taking. It was from that night, taken at 2:03 a.m. according to the timestamp. It was a selfie. But in the background, barely visible in the darkness behind him, you could see a small figure, a child standing in the shadows, watching him. Marcus still has that photo. He's never shown it to anyone, but he knows what he saw that night, and he knows it saw him too.
This next story takes place in the Pacific Northwest, in a dense forest area popular with hikers. It was sent to me by a woman named Rachel, and it's one of the most unsettling accounts I've received. Rachel loved hiking. She'd go out every weekend, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. She knew the trails well, always carried supplies, and never took unnecessary risks. But on one particular Saturday in October of 2020, something happened that made her never want to go into the woods again. Rachel had decided to tackle a more challenging trail she'd been eyeing for months. It was a 10-mile loop through old-growth forest with an elevation gain of about 2,000 feet. The trail was well-maintained, but remote. She'd maybe encounter a handful of other hikers, if that. She started early, around 7 a.m., when the morning mist still clung to the forest floor. The first few miles were beautiful. Shafts of sunlight breaking through the canopy, the smell of pine and damp earth, the sounds of birds and small animals moving through the underbrush. Around mile 4, she stopped for a water break, and that's when she noticed something odd. On the trail ahead of her, maybe 30 feet away, was a shoe. Just one shoe. A child's sneaker, light-up kind, lying in the middle of the path. Rachel approached it cautiously. The shoe looked relatively new, not weathered or dirty like it had been there for a long time. She picked it up, looking around for any sign of the child it belonged to. "Hello?" she called out. "Did someone lose a shoe?" No response, just the sound of wind moving through the trees. She set the shoe on a rock beside the trail, clearly visible in case someone came back looking for it. Then she continued hiking. A mile later, she found another shoe. Same type, same size, but this was a left shoe. The first one had been a right. Now she was getting concerned. What kind of parent lets their kid wander around a remote forest trail without shoes? She pulled out her phone to call park rangers, but there was no signal. Not unusual for this area. She'd have to wait until she got back to her car. Rachel kept hiking, but now she was on high alert, looking for any sign of a lost child. That's when she started finding the clothes. First, a small jacket, draped over a fallen log. Then a pair of child's pants,
folded neatly and placed on a stump. Then a shirt. Each item was placed deliberately, like someone was leaving a trail. Rachel's heart was pounding now. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. She needed to get help. She turned around, planning to hike back the way she'd come and alert the authorities. But as she walked back down the trail, something made her stop. The clothes were gone. All of them. The shoes, the jacket, the pants, everything she'd passed was no longer there. Rachel started walking faster, then jogging. She needed to get out of these woods. That's when she heard the voice. "Mommy?" A child's voice, small and frightened, coming from somewhere off the trail to her left. "Mommy, where are you?" Rachel stopped. Every instinct told her not to go off the trail. But what if there really was a lost child out there? "Hello?" she called out. "Where are you? I can help you." "I'm cold, Mommy. I can't find my clothes." The voice was moving, getting further away, deeper into the forest. Rachel stood at the edge of the trail, torn between helping a child and trusting her gut feeling that something was very, very wrong. She made her decision. She pulled out her pepper spray, gripped it tight, and stepped off the trail. The forest was thicker here. The underbrush grabbing at her legs, she pushed through, following the sound of the crying child. "I'm coming," she called. "Stay where you are. I'm going to help you." But the voice kept moving, always just out of sight, always leading her deeper into the forest. And then she realized something that made her stop dead. The voice hadn't changed distance. Even though she'd been hiking towards it for several minutes, it sounded exactly the same. Not closer, not further, the same. That's when she heard it. Another sound, layered underneath the child's voice. Laughter. Deep, adult laughter. Muffled, like someone was trying to hold it in. Rachel turned and ran. She crashed through the forest, branches whipping at her face, her lungs burning. She didn't know which direction the trail was. She just ran. Behind her, she could hear movement. Something large, moving through the underbrush, keeping pace with her. And that voice, that child's voice, now coming from multiple directions. "Mommy! Mommy, don't leave me! Mommy, I'm scared!" Each voice slightly different, slightly off, like a recording being played at different speeds. Rachel burst through a line of trees and found herself back on the trail. She didn't stop. She ran the entire way back to the parking lot. 3 miles of uphill trail, running full speed, not looking back. When she reached her car, gasping for breath, she looked at her phone. 37 missed calls. All from her mother. She called back immediately. Her mom answered on the first ring. "Rachel, thank God, I've been trying to reach you for hours." "Mom, I'm fine, I just didn't have signal." "Rachel, listen to me. There's been a search going on. A little girl went missing on that trail 3 days ago. They found her clothes scattered along the path, but they never found her." Rachel reported everything to the authorities. They searched the area she indicated, but found nothing. No clothes, no signs of anyone being off trail. The little girl was never found. But here's what still haunts Rachel. A week later, she was going through her hiking photos, the ones that automatically back up to her cloud storage. There was a photo she didn't take. Timestamp showed it was from that day at the exact time she was hearing the voices. It was a photo taken from behind her, from somewhere in the forest, showing her standing at the edge of the trail, looking into the forest. And in the background of that photo, barely visible between the trees, were shapes, human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, standing perfectly still, watching her.
Moving from the wilderness to the city, this next story comes from someone named David, who experienced something in his apartment that defies rational explanation. David had just moved to Chicago for a new job. He found a great deal on a one-bedroom apartment in an older building on the north side. The rent was suspiciously cheap for the neighborhood, but the landlord explained that they were still renovating the building and some units didn't have all the modern amenities yet. David didn't care. It was just him, and he wasn't home much anyway with his new job keeping him busy. The apartment was on the third floor, at the end of a long hallway. When he first moved in, he noticed the door to his right, apartment 3E, had police tape across it, old and faded. He asked the landlord about it. "There was an incident a few months ago," the landlord said vaguely. "It's been resolved. We'll be renting that unit out again soon." David didn't push for details. He figured it was probably a break-in or something. Nothing that concerned him. For the first 2 weeks, everything was fine. David would come home from work, eat dinner, watch TV, go to bed. Normal routine. But then he started noticing things. Small things at first. Items moved from where he'd left them. His keys on the kitchen counter instead of the hook by the door. A book placed face down on his nightstand when he always left them spine up. He chalked it up to tiredness, new job stress, forgetfulness. But then the sound started. It would happen around 2 a.m., like clockwork. David would wake up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. Back and forth, constant pacing. The first time, he got up and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. The next night, same thing. Footsteps at 2 a.m. He opened his door this time, stepped into the hallway. No one there. But the footsteps continued. They seemed to be coming from inside the walls. Old building, he told himself. Old pipes, settling foundation, something like that. But then things escalated. One night, David woke up not to footsteps, but to his bedroom door slowly opening. He locked it. He always locked his bedroom door, a habit from having roommates in college. But it was opening inch by inch, the old hinges creaking. He turned on his bedside lamp. The door stopped moving. He got up, checked the entire apartment. All his locks were secure, windows closed, no one could have gotten in. He went back to bed, but he didn't sleep. The next morning, exhausted and rattled, David ran into one of his neighbors in the elevator, an elderly woman from the second floor named Mrs. Chen. "You're in 3D, right?" "Yeah, just moved in a few weeks ago." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You should talk to the landlord about moving to a different unit." "Why?" "Just ask him. Tell him you want to move. Don't stay in that apartment." Before David could ask what she meant, she got off on her floor. That evening, David did some research. He looked up the building address, cross-referenced it with news articles. What he found made his stomach drop. 3 months earlier, there had been a murder-suicide in apartment 3E. A man named Robert Chen had killed his wife and then himself. They lived in that building for 30 years. Robert Chen, same last name as the elderly woman David had met. Their son had discovered the bodies after they didn't answer their phone for several days. The police report mentioned something else. Neighbors reported hearing strange sounds coming from the apartment for weeks before the incident. Pacing, banging on walls, arguing in the middle of the night. David immediately called the landlord and demanded to be moved to a different unit. The landlord sighed. "I should have told you,
but we needed to rent that apartment and... Told me what? Every tenant in 3D reports the same things. Sounds from 3E, items moving, doors opening on their own. It's been happening since the incident. The landlord offered to move David to a different floor at no extra cost. David immediately accepted. But here's what still bothers him. On his last night in apartment 3D, before the movers came, David was packing boxes when he heard a knock at his door. He looked through the peephole. Standing in the hallway was an elderly Asian man, wearing old-fashioned clothing, staring directly at the peephole. Like he knew David was looking. David didn't open the door. The man knocked again, more insistently. Then he spoke, his voice muffled through the door. "You are in my home." David backed away from the door, his heart racing. The knocking continued, growing louder, more violent, until it sounded like someone was pounding with both fists. Then it stopped. David grabbed his phone and called 911. By the time police arrived, there was no one in the hallway, no evidence anyone had been there. But when David finally worked up the courage to look through the peephole again, he saw something that made him pack his essentials and leave that night, not waiting for the movers. On the door to apartment 3E, the old police tape had been torn down.
This story comes from a group of college friends, Jake, Emma, Tyler, and Sarah, who took a road trip through rural Nevada in the summer of 2021. What was supposed to be a fun adventure turned into something none of them can fully explain, even to this day. The four of them had just finished their sophomore year and wanted to do something memorable before heading home for the summer. They decided to drive from Reno to Las Vegas, but take the scenic route through small towns and desert highways. "Get off the beaten path," Jake had said. "See the real Nevada." They would come to regret that decision. On the second day of their trip, they were driving on a 2-lane highway through the middle of nowhere. Desert stretched out in all directions, the heat creating shimmering mirages on the asphalt. They'd been driving for hours without seeing another car, another building, any sign of civilization. Around 4 p.m., they spotted something up ahead. A small building, standing alone on the side of the highway. As they got closer, they could see it was a diner. An old-fashioned 1950s-style diner, the kind with chrome trim and neon signs. "Oh, thank God," Sarah said from the back seat. "I have to use the bathroom so bad." They pulled into the empty parking lot. The diner looked off. The neon signs weren't lit, despite it being broad daylight. The chrome trim was clean but somehow dull, and there were no other cars. "Is it even open?" Emma asked. The sign on the door said, "Open 24 hours." They went inside. A bell chimed above the door. The interior was spotless. Red vinyl booths, a long counter with chrome stools, a jukebox in the corner. Everything looked like it had been frozen in time from the 1950s. But there was no one there. No staff, no customers. "Hello?" Jake called out. No response. They looked at each other, uncertain. "Maybe they're in the back," Tyler suggested. Sarah headed for the bathroom. The others sat down in the booth, still calling out, waiting for someone to appear. That's when they started noticing the details. The jukebox was playing music, old songs from the 50s and 60s, but they hadn't heard it when they first walked in, and the jukebox wasn't plugged into anything. The menus on the table were crisp and clean, but when Tyler opened one,
The prices were all wrong. A burger for 35 cents. A milkshake for 20 cents. Emma pointed at something behind the counter. Look at that calendar. Hanging on the wall was a calendar, the kind that shows a single month. The year was 1959, and all the days were crossed off up until the 15th. Okay, this is weird. Let's just get Sarah and go. But when they turned toward the bathroom, Sarah was standing in the middle of the diner, staring at them with a strange expression. Sarah? Emma said. You okay? There's someone in the kitchen, Sarah said quietly. I could hear them moving around. They all fell silent, listening. And now they could hear it too. The sound of cooking, sizzling on a grill, the clink of dishes, footsteps on tile. Hello? Jake called out louder. We'd like to order some food. The cooking sound stopped. Then, slowly, the door to the kitchen began to swing open. They all stared, waiting to see who would emerge. The door opened all the way. No one came out. But from inside the kitchen, they could see movement. Shadows moving across the walls cast by some unseen light source. Screw this, Tyler said, standing up. We're leaving. They all headed for the door, but when Jake grabbed the handle, it wouldn't budge. They were locked in. That's impossible, Emma said. There's no lock on the inside. Tyler tried. Then Sarah. The door wouldn't open. The music from the jukebox was getting louder. The same song, playing over and over, a cheerful tune that now sounded sinister in the empty diner. The windows, Sarah said. We can break a window. But when they looked at the windows, they saw something that made them all freeze. Outside, it was dark. Completely dark. The sun that had been blazing down on him moments ago was gone. Instead, there was nothing but darkness pressing against the glass. What the hell? Jake moved to the window, pressing his face against it, trying to see anything. Just darkness, like they were floating in a void. And then they saw the faces, pressed against the glass from the outside. Dozens of them, pale, expressionless faces, staring in at them. Sarah screamed. They all backed away from the windows. The faces didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. The kitchen door swung open again, harder this time, banging against the wall, and from inside the kitchen, they heard a voice. Your order's ready. It was a woman's voice, pleasant, cheerful, like a waitress from that era. But they hadn't ordered anything. Please, Emma called out, her voice shaking. We just want to leave. We're sorry for intruding. Your order's ready, the voice repeated, exact same tone, exact same inflection. The lights in the diner started to flicker. Jake made a decision. He grabbed a chair and swung it at the window. It bounced off, like hitting solid rubber. The window didn't crack. Your order's ready. The voice was closer now, like the speaker had moved from the kitchen into the dining area, though they still couldn't see anyone. What if we order something? What if that's what it wants? That's insane, Emma said. You have a better idea? Tyler started reading from the menu. We'll have 4 cheeseburgers and 4 Cokes. Silence. The flickering lights steadied. The faces in the window slowly faded away. And then, the front door clicked. They didn't wait. They ran for the door, burst out into the parking lot. It was daytime again. The sun was exactly where it was when they went inside. They jumped in their car, Jake fumbling with the keys. The engine started and he peeled out of the parking lot, kicking up dust and gravel. As they sped away, Emma looked back at the diner. Standing in the doorway was a woman in a waitress uniform from the 1950s, watching them leave. She was waving. They drove in silence for an hour before anyone spoke. They stopped at the next town they found, a normal, modern gas station, and tried to process what had happened. Later, they looked at a map, trying to find the location of that diner. According to the map, there was nothing on that stretch of highway. No buildings, no services, nothing for 100 miles. Tyler did more research. He found an old newspaper article from 1959. There had been a diner on that highway, and on June 15, 1959, everyone inside, 5 customers and 3 staff members, had disappeared without a trace. The diner was abandoned after that, eventually demolished in the 1970s, but according to Jake, Emma, Tyler, and Sarah, it's still there, waiting for the next travelers to stop and stay for dinner.
This next story is a classic urban legend that most people have heard some version of. But this telling comes from someone named Jennifer, who swears this actually happened to her older sister in 1998. Her sister's name was Michelle, and she was 16 at the time. She babysat regularly for a wealthy family in her suburban neighborhood, the Harpers. They had 2 kids, a boy aged 7 and a girl aged 5. The Harpers lived in a large house at the end of a cul-de-sac. Michelle had babysat for them dozens of times before. Easy job. The kids were well behaved, the pay was good, and the Harpers always came home when they said they would. But on this particular Saturday night in October, something was different. The Harpers were going to a charity gala downtown. Mrs. Harper was dressed elegantly, wearing expensive jewelry. Mr. Harper was in a tuxedo. "We'll be back around midnight," Mrs. Harper said as they left. "Kids should be in bed by 9. Help yourself to anything in the kitchen." "There's just one thing," Mr. Harper added. "We're having the old clown statue in the den cleaned next week. It's been in my family for years, but it's a bit creepy. If it bothers you, just don't go in that room." Michelle had been in the den before, but she'd never noticed a clown statue. "Okay," she said. The Harpers left, and Michelle started her evening routine with the kids. Dinner, playtime, brushing teeth, bedtime stories. By 9:30, both kids were asleep. Michelle went downstairs to watch TV and do homework. Around 10 p.m., she decided to make herself some popcorn. The kitchen was right next to the den. That's when she saw it. Through the open door of the den, sitting in the corner, was the clown statue Mr. Harper had mentioned. And it was creepy. Life-sized, dressed in a colorful but faded costume, sitting in a chair with its hands on its knees. The face was painted in the traditional clown style, but there was something off about the expression. The smile was too wide. The eyes were too focused. Michelle quickly looked away and went back to the living room with her popcorn. She tried to watch TV, but she couldn't stop thinking about the statue. There was something about it that deeply unsettled her. Around 10:30, she got up to use the bathroom. As she walked down the hallway, she passed the den. The statue had moved. Not much, just slightly. Its head was turned more toward the door, toward where she just walked past. Michelle's heart started racing. "I'm imagining things," she told herself. "It's just the lighting, old houses, shadows, whatever." But she closed the den door firmly. She went back to the living room, but now she was on edge. She kept glancing down the hallway at the closed den door. Around 11 p.m., her phone rang. It was Mrs. Harper. "Hi, Michelle. Just checking in.
Everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine. Kids are asleep. Good, good. We'll be back in about an hour. Oh, and Michelle, about that clown statue. If it really bothers you, you can just throw a sheet over it or something. I know it's unsettling. It's okay, Michelle said. I closed the den door. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Michelle, Mrs. Harper said slowly. What clown statue? The one you told me about in the den. Your husband said it's a family heirloom. Michelle, we don't have a clown statue. We've never had a clown statue. Michelle's blood turned to ice. Get the kids and get out of the house, Mrs. Harper said, her voice urgent. Right now. I'm calling the police. Go! Michelle dropped the phone and ran upstairs. She burst into the boy's room, shaking him awake. We need to go. Now! She grabbed the still sleeping little girl from her bed and handed her to her brother. Follow me, don't ask questions. They were halfway down the stairs when Michelle saw it. The den door was open, and the chair where the statue had been sitting was empty. Michelle heard a sound behind her, a soft sound, like cloth moving. She turned slowly. At the top of the stairs, standing perfectly still, was the clown. But now she could see it clearly. This wasn't a statue. This was a person, a very tall person, dressed in an old clown costume, face painted white, standing motionless. And it was smiling at her. Michelle screamed. She pushed the kids ahead of her. They tumbled down the remaining stairs. Michelle grabbed both of them and ran for the front door. She fumbled with the lock, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip it. Behind her, she heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps. The lock clicked open. She threw the door wide and ran into the yard with the kids, screaming for help. Neighbors came out of their houses. Someone called 911. The police arrived within minutes. They found the intruder hiding in the attic. A man in his 30s, wearing the old clown costume he'd stolen from a local theater troupe. He'd been living in the Harpers' house for 3 weeks, hiding in the attic during the day, coming down at night when the family was asleep. He'd sit in that chair, in the den, in full costume, watching the family through the doorway. Just watching. The police found evidence that he'd been in the children's rooms while they slept, standing over their beds. The man never explained why he did it. He barely spoke during his arrest or at trial. He was convicted of breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and several other charges. But here's what still haunts Michelle and why Jennifer's family never tells this story. When the police were processing the house, they found Michelle's phone on the floor where she dropped it. The call log showed the call from Mrs. Harper at 11:02 p.m., lasting 3 minutes. But when they contacted Mrs. Harper at the charity gala to interview her, she swore she never called Michelle that night. Her phone records confirmed it. No call was made. So who called Michelle? Who warned her to get the kids and get out of the house? The police never found an answer. Michelle never babysat again. And sometimes, late at night, she still gets phone calls from numbers that don't exist, warning her about things that haven't happened yet.